your flesh and blood.
Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I am Richard Dugan, Reverend Dr. D, and we have a very special guest with us who's going to talk about something that happens to all of us. It affects every aspect of our lives. It's called uncertainty. Now, I have been using a term because I know a lot of people do not like the word change. And my guest, Scott Stirrett, is going to help us to address that. But he deals with it from a little different verbal perspective, but it's the same kind of thing, at least from my perspective. The uncertainty advantage. Launching your career in an era of rapid change. Scott, first of all, welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us and helping us to learn how to, and I'm not even sure if the word is correct, Scott, to learn how to manage, to cope, to deal with, to get over this whole aspect of adversity in our lives.
Thanks so much for having me on the show, and I can't wait to talk more about uncertainty.
Now, I use a term because a lot of folks don't like the word change. Then, oh no. I want things to stay the same, you know. And of course, I'll use the analogy of a pool of water and say, okay, so you would like this pool of water never to change. So you're talking about stagnant versus dynamic, as is used in computer lingo too. And so what's going to happen is it's going to get murky and you're going to get moss growing on top and maybe mosquitoes and it's going to start to smell. Whereas if it's constantly agitated and moving about and so forth, that's the dynamic aspect. It's going to stay fairly fresh and so on and so forth. And that's the way our lives are. So I like to use this term, Scott, divine flow. The program Tell Me Your Story focuses on new paradigms for a new world, looking for those new ways of living. The old ways don't work, just look around. But even more importantly, Scott, giving people choices and knowledge of those choices. And you have a different perspective or different choice when it comes to adversity. Talk to us about the light bulb that went off in you that said, you know, I really need to write some of this stuff down because I really want to help people to reach their full potential. And I think I've got some good things to offer.
The genesis of this book came from the COVID-19 pandemic when I, like many other people, were really struggling to cope with all of the uncertainty that existed in the world. It was a very dark time in Canada, both in the sense of pandemic, but we also were just really shut down, like in terms of what we could do as Canadians. It was really kind of limited. So I had a lot of time spent, indoors. It's also very cold in the winter. And my mind started to spiral. And I began to develop a lot of like compulsive kind of tendencies, Googling illnesses, various other things. And my anxiety really began to like skyrocket. And I ended up getting diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder and going through intensive treatment over the span of a couple months. Luckily, today I now feel better than ever 4 years later. But at the core of what is OCD, it's a fear of uncertainty. And it's a desire to want to control the future when that is completely impossible. So I was motivated to write this book from my own experiences in struggling and coping with uncertainty, but also at various other points in my life where I've loved uncertainty. When I was 22, I left a job at Goldman Sachs in New York City to move back to Canada to create a not-for-profit that had pretty much zero money in the bank. And that was one of the most exhilarating points in my life. And lastly, I'm also motivated to write this book because in my work at Venture for Canada, where we've helped almost 10,000 people launch their careers across Canada, I've seen firsthand that fear of uncertainty isn't something that just people with OCD experience. It's something that holds back so many people in their lives and careers. Arguably, it's the number one thing that I see that holds young people back as they start their careers and lives. So I'm motivated to write this book from a mixture of personal experiences and because I think that my personal experiences, while unique to me, there are parallels in the experiences of many others. And I wish a book like The Uncertainty Advantage existed when I was starting my career.
Mm. Well, it's interesting because this uncertainty is by any other name is a constant in the universe. I mean, everything is moving and changing. But we wouldn't necessarily look at the macrocosmic world, let's say through a telescope or looking at the Hubble telescope or James Webb telescope images and so forth, that there's uncertainty out there. This is what the universe does, and we go ooh and ah. But boy, when it happens to us and things start crashing into one another and there's change and so forth, there's no ooh and ah. There's a lot of emotional upheaval, just like what you just described. And this program, this particular conversation, comes at quite an appropriate time, especially for me and my wife, because as I shared with you at the front, we are having to move from our home of 19 years. And I made the comment to you that, maybe we should have stayed in Phoenix back in 2006. We'd still own our home and so on and so forth. But it was the heat. We had the opportunity. I wanted to go someplace that was cooler. I wanted to get by the water. And I'd had all the heat that I could take in Phoenix, which is my hometown. So we made the move and we're here, and this is what we have to deal with. Are those some of the first things that a lot of folks struggle with is dealing with the realities of what is, as opposed to, oh, what if I'd only done this, if I'd only done that, second guessing the decisions that they've made that have actually brought them to the moment where they're now dealing with this adversity.
I think many people, particularly if someone is high in the kind of self-reflection or like neuroticism, would have like a tendency towards like evaluating like their past kind of like choices. And I think that if you have a tendency to focus more on the past, I would say that often the my observation and what I've read from different books, there's maybe a little bit more of a tendency towards like depressive like feelings. I'd say if you're focusing more on the future a lot, then you would have a more of a tendency towards anxiety. And I think that what I observe is that the people who often have more challenges with uncertainty are generally more like anxious people, like people who are very like future focused, because the future can be stressful. The future is what we can't control. What's happened has happened. So to answer your question, Richard, I think that in some ways it's not the past that scares people. It's more in terms of uncertainty. It's more the future.
So it's sort of the void, as some would say, that dark void, because we don't know what's in there. We don't know what's going to happen. What about do you come across some folks? Well, let me back this up by saying, folks, there's a website. You can go to scottstirrett.com and find out more. We'll be linked to that website. By the way, that's SCOTT and then STIRRETT. You like to double up your consonants, don't you? .com. We'll be linked to that website. But do you find, see, I'm normally a very optimistic person, and even in the circumstances that my wife and I find ourselves in now, I'm still very optimistic. Back when we moved to Santa Barbara from Phoenix in 2006, she came to me and said, "I'm scared. I feel like we're on the edge of a precipice." That was her word. And everything that I had learned up to that point in the interviews and the books and so forth was, when you come to the edge of a cliff, there are two things that you do. And now those two things seem counterintuitive in the order in which you are to do them, but they are: you jump and you trust. And who are you trusting? What are you trusting? And this is the way I put it: the universe. I'm a very, I believe that, as I don't know if it was Stephen Hawking or I now I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name of Cosmos, the first series back in the 70s. I can't for some reason. Anyway, one of them said that this is a friendly universe. It's not here to harm us. It's here to help us if we'll just trust. And so that's what we did. And the next thing you know, and I had no fear during that period. Um, what about situations like that? Now, young people, because you say this book is geared primarily towards them and finding their reaching their full potential and so forth. But they have peers, they have siblings, they have, parents, I'm sure, as they are setting out into the world, who may or may not support what it is, their choices, or they're trapped in their own baggage, if you will. And then they start laying that on the young person who is just trying to get out there and do something. Um, how do you, I don't know if I want to say the word counter that. How do you address that? You don't want to cut people off, say, "Oh, you're dead to me. I don't want to have any," because you're not helping me, your negative energy and everything, especially parents and siblings. How do you coach people in that regard? How do you address that?
I think there's like a range of experiences. And I think at the most like extreme level, like if someone is in like an abusive relationship, then it might make sense to cut them off. Like there are instances where that kind of behavior is, I think, reasonable. That being said, I think that obviously has to be a pretty extreme situation to cut off contact with a member of your immediate family. And I'd say in general, in navigating these kinds of situations, I would focus on like what can you control as the person? Like you can control your behavior. You can't control the behavior of your loved one. And if your loved one has a misplaced sense in terms of their relationship with uncertainty, I would encourage you to not fixate on how they are managing a situation, but fixate on what you can do.
Hmm.
And in terms of influencing their behavior, I would very rarely recommend saying to someone, I think the most effective way to coach a family member to develop a better relationship with uncertainty is to ask them questions, to get them to reflect. And it's in doing so you can potentially like gradually influence like their behavior. But at the end of the day, like going back to what I said earlier, like focus on what you can control, and that's yourself. And, if possible, try to influence your loved one, but recognize that you're just a factor. At the end of the day, you can't control what they're going to do.
I think that's a very good point. It's one of those situations where we're here as a community. I mean, the human race is here as a community. If we were meant to live separate, solitary lives, I'm pretty certain there are sufficient class M planets in the universe for all 8.5 billion people to live solitary lives on all those planets. But what's the reality? We're all here. And that to me seems to be a very important factor. We're talking with Scott Stirrett, and we're talking about His latest work, a book that I think you're going to want to pick up. I know I'm going through it. The Uncertainty Advantage. There's also a quiz. We'll talk about that as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. We are talking with Scott Stirrett, and we're talking about his book, The Uncertainty Advantage. I've always found it laughable when I hear this phrase, we are now, right now, we are living in uncertain times. And I look back through the history of man, I'm going, I don't see any time in human history where we've ever lived in certain times. I mean, am I right? Is that a fair assessment that there has never really been a certain time because there's always adversity. Always.
Yeah, there's always been adversity through human history. I'm reading this book right now called, I think it's like Dinner with King Tut, but it's like an archaeology book. And they go through the experiences, like various stories through history from ancient Egypt to actually indigenous people in California, more in the northern part, to talking about various other historical situations. And one of my reflections from it was just how hard life was for before kind of there was technology and the Thomas Hobbes and the concept that like without kind of a state you end up having lie or structure you end up having lives that are solitary, nasty, brutish, and short was I think quite like true, and that's what life was like for a lot of people. So to answer your question, Richard, I think absolutely history has often been defined by uncertainty. What I would say is unique today is, let's say you were born in 1600 France. There was a lot of uncertainty in terms of disease. There was a lot of uncertainty in terms of politics, a lot of things. People died at a much greater frequency and much earlier in life. So in that way, there was more uncertainty. What's different about now is that the life of somebody in 1600 and the life of somebody in 1620 wasn't that different. Like it was a little bit different, but like for all intents and purposes, if you were to like time travel between those 20 years, things would look pretty similar. I think if you go today and you go from 2025, let's say to 2045, the world could look very different in the next 20 years than how it looks like today. So to answer your question, Richard, I think at one level, the world was more uncertain in the past in terms of the risks on our lives and but in some ways the world is more uncertain today in the sense that things are changing, social norms, technologies at a faster rate than I think at any other point in human history. And that is it's the uncertainty, but in some ways it's the rapid change of our era that's what makes it unique compared to some other moments in history.
Hmm. I also chuckle at the phrase when I'm watching documentaries about history, different eras. And this event changed the course of history. And I'm going, did you know where it was going? How did you know the direction it was going that this would change it? I'm going, how do we know this? To me, it's a silly phrase. We don't even know where we're going to be in 10 minutes, let alone 10 months or 10 years, and what choices that we make. That's a focus of my book, Choices 5 Steps for Life. Let's talk a little bit about the choices that we make based upon the adversity. It's been said that where we are today is based upon the choices we've made in the past, and where we'll be tomorrow is based upon the choices we're making today. And one of my guests said, yes, that's true. However, the choices you make today are based upon your perception of what you think the future will be. And if you're pessimist, like a lot of folks are, I think, many anyway, they think that Armageddon's coming, at the end of the world, and nuclear war and proliferation and all those things. I'm an optimist. Now, if that's going to happen, I want to be at ground zero. Okay, I want to be vaporized in an instant. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't want to be a survivor, but I'm an optimist, and I believe, and I have a trusting of people, and so on and so forth. How do we make the excuse me, the choices that are necessary to place us where we would like to be. Okay. Whether it be career or where we live or who we are in relationship with, and so on and so forth. How do you counsel people in that regard, in terms of a vision of their future? Again, it's an imagining, if you will, in terms of making the choices today that may very well take them to where they want to be down the road.
One of the core pieces of advice in my book, The Uncertainty Advantage, is the importance of defining your values and your mission statement. So, on the topic of values, I would encourage a listener to think around, write down like the top 30 values that matter to you, and then reflect about where do they stand out to you in your life. When you have had really difficult situation or a moral dilemma, what are the values that you go back to determine your decision? And eventually narrow it down to like 4 or 5 top values. For me, they're integrity, inclusiveness, ambition, and curiosity. And use these values to guide your decision making. I'd also recommend creating a personal mission statement. For me, my mission statement is to help others achieve their full potential.
Mhm.
And often when I'm presented with an opportunity or am considering an idea, I link back to that mission statement. I link back to my values. There's someone who I was talking with this morning who kind of pitching me on something, and I ultimately don't think it's a fit because I don't think it aligns with my values and it doesn't align with my mission statement. And there's a lots of directions we can get pulled to in life. But I think if you're clear on your mission and you're clear on your values, that's going to help you make the right decision to get you to where you want to be.
Hmm. How long did it take you to put this together? Obviously, discovering the need for it, but bringing it into reality, both your book as well as the work that you do to coach and counsel people.
The book started in September 2023. So we're taping in July 2025. So it's been almost 2 years since this book journey started. And yeah, it took me around a year and a half to kind of finalize the book, go through all the different rounds of editing. I went through traditional publisher, so there's like a lot of different kind of steps through that of editors, feedback from various readers. And yeah, that was the kind of time for the book. In terms of Venture for Canada, which is the organization I founded Venture for Canada over 11 years ago. So I've been doing it as of this month, 11 years and 3 months full time. So it's been quite the journey. We've done a lot of different things, and a lot of my experiences at Venture for Canada inform my thinking in the book.
It's fascinating, in my opinion, that you would take on a subject like this because, again, the whole concept of adversity. We always try to avoid it. We don't want adversity in our lives. We want to keep things, fairly stable. But that isn't the reality of the world in which we live. And I mean, even when we start talking about our individual, let's just say our individual health, even though maybe many of us are doing what we think are all the right things, there's certain things that pop up. It's like, oh, I got to deal with that now. Oh man, and it's one of those things too where I mean I'm with my wife and I in our impending move and where we're going to move. I mean, we're going to stay here on the Central Coast or somewhere else in the country or somewhere else on the globe. And what does that mean? And what do we have to do to make that happen on all of those different levels? And it's like, oh, I've really got a whole lot on my plate. I really don't need this. Doesn't matter whether I need it or not. It's something I have to deal with. Do you find that there are certain adversities that people have in their lives that if they really thought about it, they could actually let that go because it really isn't that important? Or are all elements of adversity important because, as I have heard it said, and they've used other names for adversity, it builds character. And I've often thought, isn't there an easier way to build character? That kind of thing. What are your thoughts in that regard? That the advantages, as you talk about in the book, the adversity advantage, what are the advantages of adversity in our lives?
One of my favorite books is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, ended up writing a book about his experiences. And one of the things that he writes about is that our relationship with pain and suffering changes when we find meaning in that pain. If we view pain as meaningless, it's tough to get any kind of positive kind of outcome from the situation. And even though he dealt with one of the most extreme situations, living in a concentration camp for several kind of years, he
Hmm.
was very resilient through that kind of experience. And he observed that there was a high correlation between people who were able to withstand all of the horrible treatment and their ability to find kind of meaning in the suffering. And I think in the context of a broader set of life experiences, that the more that you seek kind of meaning through pain, even in my context, which I was nothing as severe as him, but like my experiences dealing with obsessive compulsive disorder and having a really challenging year, I think one of the ways that I find meaning through that experience is through writing this book and through talking about uncertainty, and that it was a really tough year, but ultimately that there was so much learning from it, and that I think I have actually, this book is in some ways continuing to create new meaning kind of for me. So that's to say it's not to justify pain, right, or illness or mistreatment. Like those are things that I think often we want to avoid. But I think if bad things happen to you, which inevitably they will, the one of the hardest things for us as humans then is to find meaning. We are meaning makers as a species. And I think the more that we find meaning from suffering, the more that we can not graduate from suffering, but that we can ultimately move forward with that suffering.
Hmm. Is the perception is the perception of that adversity any way a key to working through it? And that's the whole other aspect of it too, is that we do have to go through it. We can't avoid it. We can't go around it, go under it, over it. We do have to go through it in order to get to the other side of it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the famous American poet Robert Frost once said that the only way out is through. And it's a line that has resonated with me a lot. I think if you are suffering, and I think of the context of the OCD experience, which if you haven't had OCD, it might sound trite or like I just was washing my hands, but it really almost like put me in a situation where I needed to be on like disability. Like it was a really, really tough kind of, especially 6 months or if, but a broader, I'd say tough 18 months. And I think in my kind of context, what was really important was like often actually going back to that line, which my therapist at first said to me, which is that I can't avoid uncertainty. I can't run away from it. That the only way I can develop a better relationship with uncertainty is ultimately like staring it in the face, not doing compulsive things, not avoiding the uncertainty, but ultimately it is literally walking straight through it. Like you have a hurricane and you're walking right into the eye of the hurricane. And I think that applies to many different challenging life experiences, which are often the most challenging life experiences are often the ones that are the most uncertain.
Hmm. Well, then, then we will build some great character through our process as we deal with what we're dealing with in that regard. Scott is our guest here. Scott Stirrett is my guest, and we're talking about his book, the book that you can get a copy of. We hope that you will, and it is a book that will really help you. I like the color because it's sort of like the stop sign as opposed to the red light, green light, yellow light. The uncertainty advantage, launching your career in an era of rapid change as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. There is a quiz that Scott Stirrett has provided for you on his website, which is scottstirrett.com, which we will be linked to. And I took that quiz, and there are I guess the maximum total that you can get is 48 out of 48 out of 48. If I don't know that anybody's ever done that. However, I don't know that that's the goal necessarily to try to get the highest score per se, but the score kind of tells you. And I took the quiz. I'm curious as to, uh, not knowing, of course, the answers that I gave to those questions. Does 30 out of 48 tell you anything about my ability to deal with uncertainty?
So based on the data that I have now, and I think that there's approaching around 130 people who filled out this quiz over the last 2 months. 30 out of 48 is, I would say, almost exactly an average score. So you're right at the midpoint, approximately. And what that would tell me, Richard, is that you're somebody who maybe likes uncertainty in some contexts, but that when you have too much uncertainty, it can definitely feel like overwhelming.
Mm.
And that, if let's say 90% of things in your life are certain and 10% are uncertain, you can probably cope with that. But if maybe 80% of things in your life or 50% are uncertain, then it can start to getting into more danger anxiety level. And the score isn't clinical at all, but just based on the data collected, that would be my high level observation.
And we actually talked a little bit about this before we started, that the answers can change. In other words, I can answer question one today this way and a different way tomorrow or the next day, based upon whatever adversities in my life. And that's something too that I think people need to be aware of, is that, yeah, this is where you're at today, but you're still breathing, you're still learning, you're still growing, you're still experiencing, and that may change the answer to that question tomorrow. So there's room for, shall we say, growth, or self improvement, if you will.
Yeah, oh, totally. Our relationship with uncertainty can significantly evolve over time. I look at myself today compared to 4 years ago. I'm way more comfortable taking risks today than I was 4 years ago in a variety of ones. One is like publishing a book and putting myself out there in ways that I would never have 4 years ago. And yeah, and so a lot of other things. I'd say that the core message of my book, The Uncertainty Advantage, is that we can all develop our uncertainty muscles over time, and that our relationship with uncertainty is constantly changing. So, right now, if you're in a moment where you're struggling in coping with uncertainty, think about what are things like building your risk-taking muscles or investing in self-compassion that can help you develop a better relationship with uncertainty moving forward.
Hmm. It is, there's another dynamic that we need to consider here, and that is the uncertainty principle, if you will, and the accompanying advantage thereof when you are in a relationship, when there are other people involved in that uncertainty. My wife is involved in that uncertainty, and everybody deals with it differently. I try to stay out of the emotions as much as I can, because they get in the way of dealing with the adversity, of trying to process and figure out, okay, what's the next step, and what's the next step, and what's the next step. Other folks get caught in the emotions surrounding that uncertainty, the fear, the angst, and so forth, so on. How do you help people in that regard to get through, or at least to postpone the emotional reaction to uncertainty? Because again, I don't want anybody to be denied the freedom to express their emotions over whatever it is they're going through, because that helps to release a lot of that. But I'm just curious as your perspective on that.
One thing I would recommend someone to consider is to get their loved one to think about how they can be more self-compassionate. Because when something's really challenging, I think self-compassion is something that can help you through your darkest time. And some of the things that you can do to help your loved one develop self-compassion is first, you can ask your loved one to talk to themselves in like a nicer voice. Like in essence, like, okay, would your friend talk to you like this? And if they wouldn't, then think about developing a little bit of nicer self-talk. A second piece of advice is the importance of just recognizing your shared humanity. Essentially, if you're facing a challenge, recognizing there's so many other people around the world who are facing the same challenge at the same time. And that can help you feel more compassionate towards yourself. And the third is just being mindful about how you're feeling, that it's okay to be stressed. I think a lot of the time when we develop an unhealthy relationship with anxiety, it's we say to ourselves, don't be anxious, or I don't want to feel that way. And instead, and I do that all the time. And I think it's sometimes saying like, no, this a little bit of anxiety is what I need right now, and accepting it and being okay with it. So, Richard, the advice I would have for your loved one is how can you help that person be kinder to themselves? Because the more that we're kind to ourselves, the more that we can weather the storms.
Yeah, and certainly I've been doing that as well with my wife in particular because she's having a great struggle with all of this. I mean, um, the, the the things that have happened just in the last 2 months here in June and July of 2025. We lost our dear friend, her protector dog, Angus, 2 days before we received the notice that we had to move. And it's like, okay, now what else can happen? I mean, that's almost sort of the reaction to some of the adversity that happens is, all right, there was one, and now there's two, and okay, what's number three, and what's number four, and so forth. It's like, is this piling on? And then why are you piling on, universe? And it's just, it's what's happening. And yet there are other elements that are going on in the world today. I mean, AI is upending industries. Career paths are unpredictable and unstable and so forth. And the old playbook, as it's described, it's obsolete. Now, that's the bad news. But there apparently, tell us about the good news that you talk about in your book, the uncertainty advantage.
There are so many different possibilities from uncertainty. We can fixate on the negative in terms of uncertain situations, and in many ways we're hardwired to do that. But also, it's in moments of uncertainty where there's so much possibility. Everything good in this world comes from uncertain situations. And when things are moving fast, like they are in our current world, there are more opportunities emerging than ever before. So the advice that I'd have is when you're dealing with an uncertain situation, rather than focusing on all the negatives, think about also what are all of the possibilities that can exist from that uncertainty.
Hmm. It's there are also old messages. We could call them myths that exist when it comes to adversity. I worked for a boss back in the 80s and early 90s who lived by the law of diminishing returns. Don't put out more than you expect to get back. And I just couldn't work that way. It's like we had a client that came in and bought time on the station, a 30-minute program, I think it was. But he had he brought in this box of reel to reels and he wanted them put together into 30-minute programs to run on his slot. And so I took on the task of doing just that for him. 2 weeks after he started, he quit the program. I had already finished all of the tapes and so forth. And and of course, my boss was none too happy about it, simply because he was only on for 2 weeks. And I got to thinking, well, wait a minute, but the plus side with our doing what we did as a station was he walks away with a good taste in his mouth, as it were. He's going to have good things to say to other people about the station, and that could bring other people to the radio station as programmers. Now, whether that happened or not, I don't know, but at least I think we sort of rolled out the red carpet for him, and we did for everybody, because that's the way you treat people. That's just the way you treat people. And I know other people live by Murphy's law. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And it's like, there are certain aspects of that. It's like, oh God, good grief. But people come into this when they start reading your book, The Uncertainty Advantage, but they come in with those mindsets, right? How do you begin to help people to shift out of those myths, those mindsets that really are not helping them, and they may even actually be slowing them down or diverting their path, distracting, making detouring their full potential.
I think the first step is to be mindful of how you're feeling because I think a lot of the times people aren't aware of their like inner dialogue, including sometimes myself. And there's a great book, Awareness by Anthony DeMello, who was a Jesuit priest and kind of philosopher. And he talks about how like a lot of times people are just like sleeping through life. But then when we really get aware and and I kind of relate to that, like my OCD experience, I would say I became a lot more aware of how I'm feeling and questioning sometimes my thoughts a little bit after I'd been getting diagnosed with OCD. So the advice I'd have is that if you're having to kind of better manage um, that spiral of negativity, it's to first be aware of that negativity. And then once you're aware of that negativity, I think it's important to just sort of gently challenge it, not to scream at it, but to say, is that really like rational? Uh,
Mhm.
you know, is that worst case scenario going to happen? Or if it is going to happen, is it that bad? And for me, actually, sometimes I find that's helpful is just to acknowledge and to say, okay, that bad thing will happen, but
Mhm.
it's not that not that bad of a deal at the or big of a deal at the end of the day. So to recap, I would say the first is it's really important to be aware of what you're feeling. And then two, it's really important to gently challenge the negative spiraling that can happen in our minds when we deal with uncertain situations.
Do you think it's true that 90% of what we worry about never happens, or is it even higher than that?
It's a good question. I actually think that much of what we worry about can happen and does happen. And so I would maybe slightly challenge it in the sense that I think that it's good to sometimes question the like catastrophic thinking, but I actually think a lot of the way that we can develop a better relationship with uncertainty is to sometimes accept bad things do happen. And the more that you accept that bad things will happen, the more that you begin to develop a better relationship with uncertainty because you realize even those worst case scenarios sometimes aren't that scary. But two is you also recognize that there's a lot that we don't control in the universe. And bad things happen to people every day. And I think people who don't accept that, including myself at various points in my life,
Hmm.
I'd say I'm a lot better at accepting it now. I think a lot of the root of anxiety is people think they can prevent the bad things that could happen to them in the universe, when really there's a lot that we just can't. There's a lot of bad things that happen to all of us that we
Hmm.
have no control over. And the more that we accept that fundamental fact, the more we can move forward with uncertainty in a positive way.
I know that a lot of people would think that, oh, my father who passed away a couple of years ago, oh, that was a bad thing. No, it was not. It was actually a good thing because 5 days earlier he was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's and dementia. And I know my father well enough to know he would not want to live that way for an extended period of time at all. Then at one point feeling trapped inside his own body and his own mind and not able to communicate and so forth. And so his departure, as I like to call it, his leaving was actually a good thing, and that at least he is now happy and or at peace, however you want to view that, and with my elder sister as well, as far as my beliefs go. What about beliefs? In terms of adversity, do they play how big a role is that still akin to myths, or is that something different?
Because what do you mean by beliefs?
Well, you talked about values earlier, and our values are based upon our beliefs.
I think that values are very important in terms of navigating uncertainty. I think that there are a variety of like beliefs that we have, both known and unknown to us, that can guide us in really significant ways in our lives. And that's what's one of the things that's really important in learning to develop a better relationship with uncertainty, but also I think to cope with the challenges of life more effectively is just being aware of fundamentally how that we're thinking, how we're being in the world. And the more that we reflect, and there is no learning without reflection, I think the more that we understand what are the beliefs, both true and false, that are governing our behaviors. And sometimes, yeah, there's probably a lot of unspoken beliefs that govern how I think in the world. And there's some that I'm aware of, probably some that I'm not. But I think interrogating and understanding and being mindful and aware of those beliefs are really important if you want to move forward with uncertainty in a positive way.
And in tying into the beliefs conversation here, we're talking also about uh, this aspect of what we are taught, especially. I mean, I was born and raised Catholic. And so going through catechism and learning about all of the different aspects, there's this aspect of suffering that you must suffer. And that some people would look at the uncertainty in life. Oh, that's just God's teaching us how to hang in there during the suffering times. And so forth. In other words, sort of the building of character, which again is not a bad thing in terms of becoming a stronger person, a more aware person, and so forth. Um, but at the same time, I'm thinking, suffering, really? I don't know if I want to put it in that category. This is just kind of what happens. Uncertainty is just what happens in the universe. I'm not labeling it from a dualistic standpoint as good or bad. It just is. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that to the first point on kind of religion, I think that like my point that humans are a species focused on meaning making. And this is not judgment of religion, but I think religion is a kind of meaning making
Yeah.
in its diverse kind of forms. And an important part of suffering, and I think there's aspects of my message in my book where I talk about post-traumatic growth and finding meaning in suffering as it relates to self-compassion and a few other topics that relates actually in some ways to like I'm not Catholic, but that relates to kind of Catholicism or kind of Christian thought and the thought of other religions, which is to say that it is important, I think, to not it's not to self-flagellate or to say suffering is a good thing, but it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And our choice once it happens to us is we can choose to only see the negativity in it, or we can choose to reflect and to think about what are the positives that come from challenging experiences. After the First World War, there was a study on kind of who were the veterans from this horrible conflict that kind of had mental breakdowns and who are the people who ended up having normal lives, as normal as they can after seeing horrible things. And around this time, there was the delineation between post-traumatic stress, which is something people know about, most people. Essentially, that's when you are struggling to cope with traumatic situations and you're seeing them constantly in your head and you're having panic attacks. And there's post-traumatic growth. And that's essentially when you actually have like the disintegration of your former self and you form like a new sort of being, right? A new personality. And the term is often called positive disintegration. And in the context of challenging life experiences, I think you often have these two extremes. You have kind of the breakdown of the self in the sense of a significant mental health issue, but you can also have the positive breakdown of the self that causes you to challenge your existing worldviews, your existing ways of being. And in doing so, you're still the same person, but you become in many ways a different kind of like entity. And that's not to demonize people with post-traumatic stress. And I don't think it's like a choice in the sense I think some people just have a more predisposition to PTSD versus PTG, post-traumatic growth. But I think, as much as you can influence when you have that challenging situation, it is to think about uh, positively disintegrating. And when you have really challenging experience, how can you be a new version of yourself? And how can you find meaning from something that is undoubtedly a challenging experience, but ultimately an experience that could, in the long term, shape you to be an even better version of yourself?
Yeah. That's interesting because there was this piece on TV just the other day where this woman was interviewed about how she, over the past few years, I can't recall how many years, she has been working to change her personality, to change herself. I don't know that she ever meditated before, but that's one of the things she incorporated. I have a good friend who's one of our guests, regular guests on this program, Dennis Henson. He wrote a book called the Real Impact Daily Inspiration Series. It's a book containing stories of inspiration about all kinds of well known people. Then there's a section on quotes and poems, book lists of books that have inspired him. And he has always encouraged people every day to read something inspiring. It doesn't have to be a long story, it could be one of the quotes in his book or a poem, what have you, and that will help you to stay on track once you set your goal, which is what he talks about, setting your goal, and so forth. And that's kind of what she was doing. She was really sort of recreating her personality because she found sort of that self-reflection element that she didn't like the person she was, and she wanted to be somebody different, you know, not in terms of taking on somebody else's personality, but of having a different mindset more than anything else. And I thought, wow, that's kind of what you're talking about here too, is changing one's mindset and being that self-awareness that, and it's not that I'm a bad person today, but I'd like to be better tomorrow than I am today, especially when it comes to dealing with adversity. Your thoughts?
I think that our personalities can like evolve significantly.
Hmm.
Lots of people talk about neuroplasticity and how our brains are very adaptive. And one of the core things I talk about in the book is the importance of fostering adaptability. It's the second pillar. And on that kind of vein, I think that we are all changing and evolving. I'm 34. How I am today is quite different than I was at 24. And how I was at 24 was different than I was at 14. And our environment changes our personality, the both in terms of who we associate with, but also the broader political social landscape that we all live in. And I think a lot of people think that we're set for like life. And I think there's some aspects of traits that we all have like tendencies towards that are the same at 5 and the same at 60.
Hmm.
But I am a firm believer of like growth mindset and that we can significantly evolve as like people over time and that we can get better and better. We can also get worse and worse, but that each of us has the potential to be a better person, significantly better.
But the starting point, of course, is that self awareness. And if you don't have that self awareness, then you probably will never come to the conclusion. And again, this is not, as you also stated, not passing judgment on anybody by any means, but that, you are who you are. And it seems to me like part of the process too is accepting who you are right now. All right. That's the first step. And then you can take that evaluation and take the quiz that's on your website. You know, that's something that you can do as well by going to scottstirrett.com. We'll be linked to that website as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan here with Scott Stirrett, and we're talking about his book, The Uncertainty Advantage. And he challenges myths, he challenges pretty much everything about who and what we are from the standpoint that adversity is just part of what the universe dishes up on a regular basis. And it's like, Scott, it was one of those things that when we moved here, and over the years, we dealt with the wildfires, as I'm sure you've heard of. And I know you folks in Canada, you've You've been dealing with your own too. But over the years, we have dealt with probably 18, 17 or 18 different wildfires over the 19 years we've been here and only evacuated once. And then, we're sitting here thinking after the sixth or seventh or eighth or ninth or 10th, we're going, maybe we might want to move somewhere else. But then it dawned on us both, it doesn't matter where you move. You're going to deal with something. Now, here up, on the west coast of the United States, Washington, Oregon, California, and then you go in a little further, you're dealing with wildfires, almost all the way to the Rockies, to the Continental Divide. Now you cross the Continental Divide. Now you deal with tornadoes. You go along the eastern seaboard or the Gulf Coast. You're dealing with hurricanes and a bunch of other stuff. Hawaii, dealing with volcanoes. Well, you live up in northern U.S. Where Yellowstone is, and you may deal with one too. But the adversity when it comes to Mother Nature, it's everywhere. So I guess you kind of have to sort of choose which one do I really want to deal with. I know Texas dealing with the flooding right now. Uh, is there a way for us to sort of kind of choose our adversity? Maybe using that example of Mother Nature, um, but at the same time, maybe there isn't. There is no way to, you know, calculate, be calculating in terms of dealing with certain adversities.
Yeah, I think that there are some adversities that we have no choice, like various illnesses or little choice. And then there's some uncertainties or adversities that we embrace, right? Like going to launch a business. You choose that. So yeah, to answer your question, Richard, I think that there's a mixture of both.
Mm. And I also love the aspect that you talk about in terms of um, this business of the values. I want to throw another element in there because we talk about this all the time on this program. And the way we talk about it is this: we encourage people to take some time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, and we ask people to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. What kind of a role, how big of a role is our intuition in this process of dealing with uncertainty and the uncertainty advantage?
I think intuition can be important in the sense of, in particular, like we can intuit how we're feeling. And I think intuition is important in terms of self-awareness. I have a tool that I talk about in the book that was pioneered at Yale University called the ruler method. That stands for R is for regulate. Sorry, R is for reflect. U is for understand. Uh, L is for label. E is for express, and R is to regulate. And to put it into practice would be like, let's say in your sort of situation is that the first kind of thing that's important to understand is like, hey, like how are you like feeling kind of in the body, like in a specific moment. Like let's say you're feeling stressed because you have to move. Then it's to sort of understand and you go, okay, well, why? Well, okay, there's not that much housing on the market. It's hard to find a place. Like my spouse is stressed. Then you label and you say, okay, I am feeling stressed. I am feeling overwhelmed. You can list all of the emotions. You can write that in a diary. You can record that. But labeling it both verbally as well as potentially in writing can be helpful. And then um, you express that potentially to your spouse, right? To someone else. And then finally you regulate, and then the sort of emotion begins to dissipate a little bit or become less like strong. This is to say, I think that uh, intuition is really important because it's that first step of the ruler method. And if you're having a challenging time, a challenging experience, I think the ruler method can be a really effective tool at enhancing your ability to cope with uncertainty.
Is uncertainty, uh, does it rank up there with some of the other stressors? For example, or even because when you lose something, and you can list whatever it is that you lose, whether it's a loved one, a place where you live, a job, whatever the situation might be. To me, that's part of the adversity realm. Is there a part of all of this too, where there's a grieving, dealing with the uncertainty?
I think there can be grieving more in the sense of sometimes things that have happened in the past. And I mean, the past and the present are the past and the future are linked by the present. So I think you can sometimes grieve something that happened in the past that then creates uncertainty in the future. So I think grieving can be a bridge between past suffering and future anxiety.
Hmm, very interesting. The Uncertainty Advantage. We hope you'll get a copy from Scott Stirrett, and scottstirrett.com is the website we will be linked to as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. Scott Stirrett, I want to thank you so much for being a part of the work that we're doing here to try to make a difference in the world. And part of that is dealing with the level of uncertainty. As you say, we're probably dealing with more uncertainty in a faster time period than maybe ever before in human history. But uncertainty has been with us since man has been on the planet. Um, and I appreciate the fact that you have brought an awareness to this. Granted, I do again. I recognize the book is geared primarily towards young folks around your age, not so much mine. I'm 65, but the lessons that can be learned from your book, the uncertainty advantage, would apply as well to all of us, regardless of our age or whatever our status is in the world. So thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing here.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
I have three final questions, however, for you that I ask all of my guests, and I'll ask those of you in just a moment. But I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and click notification. I hope you'll also go to Amazon and pick up a copy of my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life. Almost forgot my own book. Choices, 5 Steps for Life is available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle with Audible soon to be released. And we're also coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the publication date. So that's pretty cool. We also hope that you can leave us a tip. We have a PayPal account. That's our tip jar. If you'd care to leave us a tip, we have it there for your security as well as ours. And if you go to the homepage of richarddugan.com, there are links to both Amazon and PayPal. And finally, we hope that you will take some time during this, the decade of perfect vision, and listen to that still small voice in that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place. To our final three questions for our very special guest. The first of those is, who is Scott Stirrett?
Scott Stirrett is a person who cares about ambition, curiosity, integrity, and inclusiveness, who loves to help other people achieve their full potential, who has a pretty quirky range of interests, who loves learning. I think that's probably the thing that, I mean, I think that exists in a lot of people, but I think the perhaps is something that is maybe a particularly distinctive trait is the extent to which I'm intellectually curious about the world.
Hmm. What gets you up in the morning?
Related to that answer, I think it is learning new things.
And finally, what was your best day?
That's a great question. I'm going to use that with other people in the future. I'd say, and this is a bias to recency, but even this last Saturday was a great day. I wrote an op-ed on an interesting topic for a major, like the largest kind of newspaper in Canada, and I spent the morning kind of writing it. And then I went for a run, and then we went to see a friend and her baby, and then we went to a birthday party and met a bunch of people and some new people. And then we went out to a great dinner at a restaurant that we got a gift certificate from as a present, and it was a really good, nice dinner. And you know what? It was overall, it was a great day. It was a mixture of socializing, exercise,
Mm,
intellectual stimulation. Yeah, I think some of the best days are just typical ones, but I think ones that makes have a balance, right? Of fueling the soul,
yeah,
fueling the body, fueling the mind.
wonderful. Well, Scott, once again, thank you so much for being with us. So again, I would encourage you folks to get a copy of The Uncertainty Advantage. It is an advantage. There's an advantage in there. Get a copy of the book by going to both Scott Stirrett and .com, by the way. ScottStirrett.com is the website. Also on Amazon, again, the title is The Uncertainty Advantage. Again, we thank you folks for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to lol. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. Mike, thanks for letting me be in your life. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.